everybody. Welcome back to the True Story series. True stories of the 60s and 70s. Today, we're going to take a look at the story behind Woodstock, how it happened, the beginning of Woodstock, how many challenges they faced, and ultimately up into the concert, and talk about some of the things that happened backstage, but also to the legacy it left behind. So I am so excited to talk with you today about the true story behind Woodstock. Hi, if you're new here, my name's Ashley, and I'm a lover of 60s and 70s fashion. I absolutely love also the movies, specifically the horror movies, the TV shows, and of course, the music. And everything in between, just not the values. So if that's something you're into, definitely hit the subscribe button and stick around. So let's get into it. The true story behind Woodstock. It is one of the most well-known concerts of all time. Let me take you back to a time when people came together for one thing, music, and brought peace and love along with them. It was a different time than we know now. This could never be something that happens now. And it is a time and place that is special in that way. It was a defining moment of a generation. The state of the world in 1969 was different. It was a year of change from the challenges of the 1960s into a new era. The youth was wanting change, and in a way, Woodstock showed what this next generation was all about. Today, we're going to look at first the beginning and how it came to be. Second, we're going to look at inside the concert, some of the challenges, who was the most out of it during the concert, and of course, the legacy it left behind. So let's get into it. Woodstock planning began in January of 1969 when entrepreneurs John Roberts and Joel Rosenman partnered with promoters Michael Lang and Artie Cornfield. Together, they formed Woodstock Ventures, originally envisioned as a for-profit concert for a recording studio project in Woodstock, New York. But ultimately, what ended up happening is the entrepreneurs loved the festival idea after the success of other festivals like Monterey Pop Festival. So they decided, let's make this huge. Let's reach out to artists, specifically local ones. And of course, they thought of ones that were in the area. Specifically, Bob Dylan was one that was on the list. They figured if they could get Bob Dylan, all the other artists would follow suit. Now, they had the idea and they needed a place first, though, to have this concert. And that was the first challenge when it came to Woodstock. They needed a lot of room in an area that would ultimately, they would know once they got there. And Michael Lang has talked about this. He said he would know the place when they got there just by the surroundings, the feel of it, and also how much space it offered. And ultimately, he knew they just needed to find a really large field that would accommodate the concert that they wanted to put on. So the festival never was in Woodstock, New York, though. And that is a huge, I think, myth. Everybody thinks it was in Woodstock when in actuality, it was going to be for a recording studio in Woodstock. And the actual name was at first not called Woodstock. And we'll get to that later. Now, due to space and local opposition, it wasn't in Woodstock. The event was first scheduled at Howard Mills Industrial Park in Wallkill, New York, but was forced out by local officials 1 month before the festival. How crazy is that? 1 month before the festival, and they were like, okay, so now we need another place to go, which is crazy to think about logistically. Now, what happened at this first location is that the farmer that initially okayed it, he was totally cool with it. His farmland was perfect for the concert, but the people in town just were not. They weren't excited about the idea of a concert bringing all these young hippies into their town. They didn't want their town engrossed with the youth, who they thought would basically cause trouble and trash the area where the festival was being held. People of the town made this known to the farmer, and the last straw was when a friend of him had him meet him in the middle of the night to let him know that things would be taken care of, meaning someone in his family or him would be hurt. And what ended up happening is, yes, he took this threat and didn't take it lightly, but the town ended up passing laws to block the event. A specific town ordinance was passed banning gatherings of more than 5,000 people, specifically targeting the festival's projected, though initially underestimated attendance. So ultimately, the town won and Woodstock was pushed out of that town. So now the promoters, Woodstock Ventures, they're freaking out. They're like, what are we going to do? With that, Woodstock Ventures kind of did panic a little bit, but they knew the show had to go on. They had already sold tickets and they already had artists on the lineup. So, panicked a month before the show was to go on, they had to find a new place. They went out to look at different areas and stumbled upon a dairy farm from Max Yasgur. For approximately $10,000, though some sources suggest up to $50,000. It is said when they found the space, they just knew. The field itself was it. Max was open to the youth coming to his farm and even ended up going on stage to say something during the show, which just shows how like open this farmer was to letting all these people come on his land, and knowing that, he doesn't really know what's going to happen, but he ultimately, number one, probably wanted that money, but also two, was just, I think, a little bit different, compared to the people of his generation that were really against like kind of like a gathering of all these young people. They were a little bit scared of it, where he would kind of embraced it and even went on stage and was like basically like, welcome, have fun, enjoy the music.
I don't know how to speak to 20 people at one time, let alone a crowd like this. But I think you people have proven something to the world. Not only the town of Bethel, or Sullivan County, or New York State, you've proven something to the world. This is the largest group of people ever assembled in one place.
Now, the venue wasn't the only challenge that Woodstock Ventures faced. Booking the artist was the next. Because they weren't well known, it was not easy. They used leveraging industry connections, paying double fees, and using Creedence Clearwater Revival's early signing as a way to get other artists to sign on. Promoters Michael Lang and Artie Cornfield used their reputation and investor funding, and it allowed them to meet and sometimes prepay high artist demands. Once Creedence Clearwater Revival signed for about $10,000, other bands felt confident in the event, allowing organizers to secure acts like The Who, Janis Joplin, and Jefferson Airplane. Now, there is stories about The Who really kind of being like a little nervous about doing the festival. They weren't really all about it at first, and it took a little whining and dining of the Who to get them to be a little bit more convinced to do this. And ultimately, they gave in and decided to do the festival. Now, Jimi Hendrix was the highest paid act, receiving $8,000. The Beatles were recording Abbey Road and near a breakup, so that's why they didn't attend. Led Zeppelin's manager turned it down. He didn't want the band to be just another act on a crowded bill, and Joni Mitchell canceled on her manager's advice after seeing news reports of extreme traffic congestion. And it is said that she definitely regretted that decision. Once the acts were secured, that wasn't the end of the challenges. Because they changed the location, there were challenges. When they first promoted the festival, it was officially billed as Woodstock Music and Art Fair, an aquarium exposition, 3 days of peace and music. The location of Wallkill, New York. With a quick change of location, they did not have time to make fencing or any ticket booths. And with the amount of crowds they ended up getting, the concert became free. Can you imagine that today? Like they underestimated how many people are going to show up, and all of this stuff happened, and then they're like, surprise, it's going to be free. And it just shows like how different the generation was, where they were just like, cool, like we'll just go with it. And even people that already had paid were just like, whatever, like I'm gonna enjoy the music. I feel like if that happened now, we're in such a different climate and time that I feel like you would have people that were just so pissed that like they paid and other people didn't, that it would cause this whole uproar. But in this time, it was just like, whatever, it's about the music. We all just want to hear music and have fun. And that just says something about that generation. And I think that's pretty cool. Tickets were 18 in advance originally and 24 at the gate. Now, because of that overwhelming crowd, which was over 400,000 people, exceeding the expected 50,000 to 100,000 they expected. That's why initially they made it free. And they just couldn't contain all those people. And they did this really to prevent a dangerous situation with a growing crowd. The organizers eventually did, though, recoup that money because you got to think about they lost so much money with not selling any tickets. They sold some in advance, but how many people they had, they would have like made so much money, right? If they had sold those tickets. But they didn't. It became free. And so you're thinking, how did they make any money? And that was a big thing is like they definitely were going to be in a little debt, but what helps them was that they recouped their money through the sale of the documentary film they did and the live soundtrack album. So that really helps them to pay back the artist, to pay the artists and pay back all these fees that they had kind of um, mounded up doing this festival. So the road to Woodstock was definitely not an easy one, but the challenges didn't stop there. And that's the crazy part. And I don't know how the Woodstock Ventures crew held it together because I would have been just like in a corner crying at all the things that kept happening to them. And even at the concert, when the concert started, it continued. And this is what we're going to talk about next is inside the concert. So first they didn't think how the acts were going to get to the venue location. Like they didn't really have a game plan. They just figured the acts would drive to the location, but they didn't take into consideration how many people ended up showing up and all the traffic jams that it caused. Like traffic was at a standstill. There was no way for these acts to get to the festival location. And so in a panic, they had to figure out like how are we going to get these acts here? And so they literally called up helicopter companies and were like, hey, we need you to do X, Y, and Z to help us with this concert, get these acts here. And they literally had to get helicopters like on a whim, and they had to figure out where these helicopters were going to pick up the artists and then where they were exactly going to drop them off near the field, near the location of the concert. So it was all these logistical things that came into play because of the traffic jam. And it was insane. And because of this challenge, they did have a set list of who was going to start and who was going to go on stage. But because of the challenge, what ended up happening is they were stuck. They literally didn't have people to start the show at first. And so they literally started pulling anyone with a guitar and a voice and ask them to play. They were like, "Hey, do you want to go on? Do you want to go on?" What ended up happening is they had Richie Havens be the first performer at Woodstock. And he wasn't like actually going to be the first person that was to open Woodstock. He was just at the right place at the right time to get on that stage. So Richie Havens was the first performer at Woodstock, taking the stage around 5:07 p.m. on Friday, August 15th. He was not originally scheduled to open, but went on first because the other artists were stuck in traffic. He played an extended set and kept going out after he did a million encores, nearly a 3-hour set featuring his famous improvisation Freedom to allow time for more artists to arrive. Talk about pressure. Like they basically were like, stay on stage, keep singing. We need you to just keep singing until more artists are able to get here. That is wild. And I think he should be so commended for that. Like the pressure and how he must have felt being like, I don't have any more songs to sing. And that's what led to his improvisation of the Freedom song. Also, other challenges that really kind of messed with the lineup were technical difficulties and weather, which meant the schedule was not at all fluid. For instance, The Who did not play until 5 a.m. on Sunday, which is crazy because they were not scheduled for that time frame. Artists also had to wait sometimes to be on stage due to all the challenges, the weather, the technical issues, the transportation. So they had time to pass. Some of them were getting bored, a little restless. Also, some of them were anxious and nervous at going on for this big crowd. Lots of drinking and drugs were used to pass the time. Janis Joplin was one of these few artists that was backstage waiting to go on. She went on a 10-hour substance-fueled wait due to the delays. She was, as most people said that were there, 3 sheets to the wind before her 2 a.m. Sunday performance. She arrived by helicopter, felt overwhelmed by the crowd size, and socialized with other artists like Grace Slick while battling nerves, which ultimately led to her substance fueled wait. Other artists that indulged were Carlos Santana, who played while on LSD, Now, Jimi Hendrix was the final act to perform at Woodstock Music Festival in 1969. There were many other artists that were definitely back there waiting and were using substances, and it was definitely said that a lot of artists went on stage, as they said about Janice, three sheets to the wind, as well as a ton of attendees that were at the festival. Now, the last act to go on at Woodstock, and one of the most memorable performances at Woodstock, is Jimi Hendrix. He was the final act to perform and played his rendition of the Star Spangled Banner, which is probably one of the most historic performances at Woodstock that is known. Now, you got to think, there were so many people at this concert, and it was a huge field that was mostly farmland. So, what was the immediate aftermath of this farmland? Now, it was a chaotic, muddy, and garbage strewn scene, leaving Max Yager's farm devastated and Bethel, New York, overwhelmed. Medical staff reported roughly 800 cases of serious drug reaction, and it took like crews of people to clean up this area after the concert. But it was said that a lot of attendees did stay and help clean up as much as they could, which again says something about that generation of youth. Now, the legacy that it left behind. Despite the logistical disasters, the event is remembered as a peaceful, defining, and transformative moment for the 1960s generation rather than a catastrophe. 400,000 attendees. Its legacy lies in celebrating community, defining a generation's values, and influencing fashion, music, and social activism. Not only that, but the film itself is an Academy Award-winning film that released the following year and helped amplify the festival's sometimes mythical status, making it a household name, according to Time magazine. Not only that, the site of the festival, Max Yager's farm, is now listed on the National Register of Historic Places, allowing the legacy of the event to continue through museum exhibits and educational programs at the Bethel Woods Center for the Arts. There will never be another Woodstock. We tried that, remember? It was a different time, a special time, a time I wish I could have been alive for. It must have been an experience like no other, one that you remember and appreciate. And that's what we can do, appreciate it for the legacy it left and all the great music and also the hope it gave us. Thank you guys for watching this 60s and 70s True Story series, The Woodstock Story. I was so excited to share it with you. I've watched so many documentaries on like Woodstock, but there's so much information out there about Woodstock, and I think it is just a time that we will absolutely never be able to recreate, but we can also just sit here and appreciate what an amazing time that was. And it is such a like time capsule that I wish I could jump back into, honestly. I think it's just the coolest thing ever. But if you like all of this stuff, 60s and 70s content, please subscribe. And if you know someone that would like this video, share and like it. And until next time, I will see you guys soon.